Um, Imagine for just a moment
Okay.
a transformation that is so incredibly slow, so vast in its scale, that it takes an astonishing 1,500 years to actually unfold.
That is a long time.
Right. I really want you to just sit with that timeline for a second. I mean, we live in a world that is completely obsessed with the 24-hour news cycle.
Oh,
You
absolutely.
check your phone, and a week feels like a lifetime.
Yeah, a decade feels like ancient history.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But what if the most important structural shifts in human civilization aren't happening in days or years, but across millennia?
It completely changes how you look at the world.
It really does. So welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we have a genuinely fascinating piece of writing to explore with you.
We really do.
We're looking at an essay titled Maturing Religions, When Faith No Longer Needs the Sword.
Such a powerful title.
It is. It's written by Lev Nemotin, and it comes from his channel, Uncompressed Thinking.
And I have to say, it is a profound, deeply reflective piece of work.
It really is.
The mission for our deep dive today is to explore Nemotin's essay, which offers this surprisingly hopeful look at the long and honestly often bloody civilizational journey by which major religions gradually disentangle themselves from political power.
Yeah.
He argues that over the course of centuries, these massive universal faiths eventually learn to outgrow the sword.
Right. They learn to stand entirely on voluntary conviction rather than political coercion.
Exactly.
And before we get into the mechanics of how that actually happens, I need to take a quick second to lay out some ground rules for you, our listener,
Definitely necessary for this one.
because this source material touches on some incredibly heavy historical religious conflicts,
Yes.
as well as very modern, highly charged geopolitical shifts in the Middle East. So we are going to state our show's impartiality rule right up front.
Good call.
We will be exploring these politically sensitive themes that absolutely intersect with modern right-wing and left-wing geopolitical alignments without taking any sides whatsoever.
None at all.
Our goal here is strictly to impartially report and unpack the fascinating frameworks presented in Lev Nemotin's original essay.
Right. We aren't endorsing them.
No, and we aren't prescribing political solutions. We are simply exploring the ideas on the page.
Which really is the best way to approach a conceptual framework like this.
I agree.
We're looking at history through a very specific macro-level lens that Nemotin has provided.
Yeah.
It's designed to make us step back and think differently about the timeline of human belief systems.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because Nemotin's central thesis completely upends how we normally view the timeline of a religion.
It really does.
He argues that religions simply don't mature in decades. They mature over centuries.
Centuries upon centuries.
Right. In their early days, these sweeping universal faiths often expand right alongside political empires.
Yes.
The belief, as he so poetically puts it, travels in the shadow of the sword.
The shadow of the sword's a great phrase.
But how exactly does that dynamic work in the early days?
Well, what's fascinating here is the actual mechanics of that early expansion.
Walk me through it.
When a universal faith is young, it certainly spreads through teaching,
Sure.
through texts, and through persuasion. But historically, it is also heavily bolstered by the expansion of political and military authority.
Right, the two go hand in hand.
Exactly. The state and the faith become inextricably linked. A king conquers a new territory, and the religion is established there by decree.
By force, essentially.
Yes, by force. But the crucial part of Nemotin's thesis is that history shows us this stage is not permanent.
It's just a phase.
It is a phase, a very long one, but a phase.
Right, and he uses this absolutely beautiful visualization in the text to help you picture this.
I loved this part.
Me too. There's this illustration showing the major religions as trees.
Right.
You see these massive ancient trees with incredibly deep tangled root systems digging into the earth.
Yeah.
And resting on the ground, completely tangled up in those roots, is a sword.
A literal sword in the roots.
Exactly.
Hmm.
But right next to these trees is a glowing archway.
The archway.
And it's labeled the maturity threshold, marking that 1400 to 1500 year mark.
It's such a striking image.
It really is. But what does crossing that threshold actually look like? When a religion drops the sword, what replaces it?
That is the pivotal question right there.
Right.
Because when a religion drops the sword, it doesn't just give up its influence.
No,
It essentially upgrades its operating system.
I like that. Upgrades the operating system.
Over centuries, these massive religious institutions acquire a deeper self-confidence.
They realize they don't need a king's army to enforce their survival.
Exactly. Instead of relying on physical conquest, they transition to expanding through cultural institutions.
Like what?
Building universities, funding hospitals, establishing rich philosophical traditions.
They rely on entirely voluntary conviction.
Yes. They realize that a culture built on genuine persuasion is actually far more resilient than a culture built on the threat of violence.
And I think it's so incredibly hard for us to notice these massive historical arcs when we are caught up in the day-to-day headlines.
Oh, it's near impossible.
When you open a news app, you are just seeing the chaotic, often violent surface of events.
You're seeing the weather.
Exactly. You're seeing the weather. Nemotin's asking us to look at the shifting tectonic plates underneath.
Precisely. Zooming out to look at a 1,500-year timeline demands a complete shift in perspective from you.
So, if 1,500 years is the standard timeline for a religion to outgrow its militant phase, I was immediately wondering something.
What's that?
Does every single religion follow this exact path? Because Nemotin actually points out a massive exception right out of the gate, which is Judaism.
Yes, among the Abrahamic faiths, Judaism occupies a very distinctive position.
How so?
Well, Nemotin notes that while the Hebrew Bible absolutely records ancient wars fought by Israel—
Right, roughly around 1200 to 1000 BCE.
Exactly. Those conflicts were fundamentally different from the religious empire building we see later in history.
Right.
Ancient Judaism was not organized as an expansionary missionary faith aiming to conquer neighboring peoples to force them into belief.
Wait, so if Judaism wasn't using armies to aggressively convert people and expand its borders like later empires did, how did they survive that early, vulnerable phase of history at all?
It's a great question.
Especially given what happened to them. I mean, the essay points to the year 70 CE as this massive cataclysmic turning point.
And we really need to pause on 70 CE.
Let's do it.
Because it is impossible to overstate the gravity of that moment. That was the year the Roman Empire besieged Jerusalem and completely destroyed the Second Temple.
And just to put that in perspective for you, the temple wasn't just a large church.
Not at all.
It was the absolute political, economic, and spiritual epicenter of their entire civilization.
Yes. When it fell, they lost their political sovereignty.
They lost their territory.
The community was entirely dispersed across the Mediterranean. They were faced with a very stark choice.
Which was?
Completely reinvent themselves or face extinction.
And that reinvention is what blew my mind. They pivot entirely.
They do. That pivot is what we now know as Rabbinic Judaism.
Right.
It is one of the most remarkable civilizational adaptations in human history.
Because they lost their political power and their armies.
Exactly. So the Jewish community had to sustain its identity through completely different means.
What did they do?
For nearly 2 millennia, they maintained their tradition through intense textual scholarship,
Rabbinic education.
intricate legal discourse, and a shared communal memory.
They became a covenantal community bound by law and ethics, rather than a nation bound by borders and military might.
Precisely.
They upgraded the software early.
They really did. Judaism serves as a powerful, very early example in this framework of a religion reaching maturity.
It discovered how to survive
Yeah.
and genuinely flourish, completely independent of the sword.
Centuries before anyone else did.
Okay, so Judaism achieves this early maturity through adaptation and scholarship.
Yes.
But as we move forward in Nemotin's framework, we see that Christianity followed a vastly different, much longer, and much bloodier path.
Very different.
It's fascinating because he points out that in its very early days, starting around 30 CE, Christianity spread entirely through persuasion.
Right. The first Christians didn't have armies.
They were actually persecuted.
Heavily persecuted.
The message just traveled along trade routes by word of mouth. But something massive shifts around the 4th century.
A huge shift.
How do we go from peaceful persuasion to, well, the Crusades?
The turning point is when Christianity becomes the official religion of the Roman Empire.
Ah, right.
Once you link a spiritual faith to the immense institutions of imperial Roman power, you enter this very long historical phase.
Where religious expansion and political expansion become totally mutually reinforcing.
Exactly. The empire expands its borders and the religion expands with it.
And the religion expands, and it provides divine justification for the empire's conquests.
It's a feedback loop.
And that kicks off what we can call the era of the sword for Christianity.
Yes.
And we aren't just talking about a few border skirmishes. We are talking about The Crusades in the Middle East.
We're talking about the medieval campaigns aimed at converting the pagan populations of Northern Europe.
The spread of Christianity across Europe happened right alongside the violent territorial expansion of kings and emperors.
It did.
And Neimotin actually crunched the numbers on this, and the data is staggering.
The human cost is devastating.
It is.
In the essay, Neimotin estimates the human toll during this long maturation period.
What are the numbers?
The historical data suggests that major wars fought under explicitly Christian religious banners resulted in roughly 8 to 22 million deaths.
8 to 22 million.
And if you take a broader interpretation, that includes frontier conflicts.
Like the Reconquista.
Yes.
And for anyone who might not be familiar, what exactly was the Reconquista?
It was a centuries-long series of brutal, grinding territorial wars on the Iberian Peninsula.
So modern-day Spain and Portugal.
Exactly, where Christian kingdoms fought to reclaim territory from Muslim Moorish rule.
And that lasted a long time.
Nearly 800 years.
Wow.
So if you include massive, religiously charged frontier conflicts like that, Neimotin notes the potential death toll rises to an astonishing 15 to 29 million deaths.
15 to 29 million.
That is the cost across a roughly 14 to 1500 year period.
It is a staggering amount of human loss.
It truly is.
But the framework argues that this violent phase eventually hit a breaking point.
Right.
It didn't just slowly fade away. It violently crashed into a wall in the 17th century with the 30 Years' War.
And we need to unpack the 30 Years' War because it is the ultimate breaking point in European history.
Let's do it. This happened between 1618 and 1648.
Right. And it wasn't just a standard border dispute.
Not at all.
This was a catastrophic continent-wide conflict where different Christian factions, Catholics and Protestants, effectively bled each other dry.
It decimated Central Europe.
Completely. In some regions of what is now Germany, massive portions of the population were entirely wiped out.
By war, famine, and disease.
It was an absolute demographic disaster.
It was the moment the civilization realized that fighting over religion was a zero-sum game.
Exactly. It took a millennium and a half and tens of millions of lives for European leadership to realize that attempting to impose religious uniformity through political and military force was ultimately self-destructive.
They just couldn't do it anymore.
No. From that horrific tragedy onward, society finally seemed to abandon the idea that faith should be enforced by the state's military.
The era of the crusading army was essentially over.
Yes.
Christianity had reached a stage where it no longer depended on political enforcement. It crossed that glowing archway in the illustration.
It did. From the 17th century onward, Christianity, of course, continued to expand globally.
But the mechanism changed entirely.
Entirely. It expanded primarily through missions, through establishing schools and hospitals.
False change.
And voluntary conversions.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Because Neimotin takes that incredibly specific 1500-year timeline and applies it directly to the modern day.
And the temporal symmetry he finds is just striking.
It is. Islam originated in the early 7th century, around 610 CE.
Right.
That means Islam today is roughly 1400 years old.
Yes.
It stands at the exact same historical age that Christianity had reached when it finally began crossing that threshold out of the 30 Years' War and leaving religious warfare behind.
It is a profound historical parallel to consider.
It really makes you think.
And just like Christianity, Islam's history involves a complex, centuries-long intertwining of faith and political power.
Right. Neimotin traces these historical markers.
He does, from the early imperial conquests of the caliphates to later sectarian struggles.
All the way up to modern militant movements.
Yes. And again, looking at the historical data, he estimates the combined death toll.
For major identifiable conflicts where Islamic religious identity and political expansion intersected.
Exactly. He estimates that falls roughly between 6 to 13 million deaths over those 14 centuries.
So Neimotin is asking us to look at the current upheavals in the Islamic world, not just as chaotic modern news,
Right.
but as a potential historical turning point. He observes a massive emerging alignment happening right now.
He does. He notes that many Muslim-majority countries seem to be deliberately moving away from the model of militant political Islam.
The model that was so dominant in the late 20th century.
Yes, you have former ideological and regional rivals now actively cooperating.
Across much of the Middle East, leadership is increasingly focusing on economic modernization.
investing heavily in technology, regional stability, and integration into the global economy.
We're even seeing unprecedented normalization agreements, like those between Israel and several Arab states,
Decades of entrenched geopolitical hostility are suddenly being rewritten.
in favor of trade and stability.
Yes.
But within this massive shift, Nemotin points out a very glaring exception.
And that exception is the Islamic Republic of Iran. To understand why Iran is an outlier here, you have to look back to the 1979 revolution.
The revolution that essentially fused church and state back together in a very modern context.
Exactly. It created a system where religious authority and military power are one and the same.
Deeply committed to a revolutionary expansionist ideology.
Yes.
And again, just to remind you, our listener, we are looking at this changing political landscape strictly through the lens of Nemotin's historical maturation theory.
Right. This is an analytical framework.
We are not making value judgments on foreign policy or endorsing any specific diplomatic stance in the Middle East.
We are simply relaying his observation that Iran's 1979 model is increasingly standing in stark contrast to the trajectory of other major Muslim societies.
Which is the core of his geopolitical point.
Yes. While Iran maintains this fusion of militant political expansion and religious authority, much of the broader Muslim world is visibly moving in the exact opposite direction.
They are prioritizing development over religious confrontation.
If Nemotin's hypothesis holds true, these shifts are more than just a temporary rearrangement of alliances based on oil or trade.
What are they then?
They represent the slow, agonizing, but structural process of a universal faith finally disentangling itself from the mechanisms of state coercion.
Which brings us to the emotional landscape of the essay, which I found incredibly compelling.
It is very moving.
Because watching these global upheavals on the news, the conflicts, the protests, the shifting alliances, it looks like chaos.
It does. It involves real human tragedy.
Right. Is Nemotin really saying that the chaos we are seeing in the Middle East right now is a good thing?
Not a good thing in the sense that suffering is ever good.
Right.
This raises an important question for you to consider. What does it actually feel like to live through macro history?
I imagine it doesn't feel great.
It rarely feels triumphant to the people on the ground. It usually feels terrifying and uncertain.
Yeah.
Think of it almost like a civilization going through a massive, rebellious teenage growth spurt.
That's a great analogy.
It's messy, it's loud, it causes a lot of friction.
But it is a structurally necessary phase of growing up.
Exactly. The author argues that if this transition is truly happening, it represents the maturation of the religion, not its decline or collapse.
And to capture that specific, complex feeling of watching this unfold, Nemot actually invents a new word.
I love this word.
He says the word hopefully just isn't sufficient for the gravity of the situation. So he uses the word prayfully.
Prayfully.
It is a quiet, profound prayer that the painful, violent transitions we see in the world today are actually the labor pains of a definitive future.
A future where all the great faiths of humanity can finally coexist without the shadow of the sword hanging over them.
Without the sword.
Prayfully. It is a beautiful distillation of the essay from uncompressed thinking.
It really is.
It acknowledges the horrific historical cost,
The millions of lives lost during these long 1,400-year arcs.
while holding space for a deeply optimistic view of our collective future.
It suggests that despite the daily headlines, the long arc of religious history is actually bending towards something much more stable and purely voluntary.
Yes.
So what does this all mean? If we distill this deep dive down to its absolute essence, we are looking at a 1,500-year arc from coercion to conviction.
It is the journey from that sword tangled in the deep roots of an ancient tree, finally crossing through the threshold of maturity.
Judaism found that maturity early, upgrading its software through adaptation and scholarship after 70 CE.
Right.
Christianity fought its way through crusades and inquisitions for a millennium and a half before finally leaving the sword behind after the devastation of the 30 Years' War.
And now, at roughly 1,400 years old, Islam may be standing right at the precipice of that exact same gateway. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it completely changes how you should consume the daily news.
It really does.
When you turn on your television and see tensions in the Middle East or debates within Islamic societies about the fusion of religion and state, it is incredibly easy to feel a sense of despair.
It looks like an endless, unbreakable cycle of conflict.
But this framework offers a completely different paradigm.
Yes.
Instead of endless chaos, You might actually be witnessing the structural growing pains of a civilization crossing one of the most important historical thresholds in human development.
You are watching history happen in real time.
You really are.
But before we go, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over.
Okay,
Something that builds on Nemoten's framework, but takes it in a slightly different direction.
I'm intrigued.
We've spent this entire deep dive talking about ancient and medieval religious faiths requiring 1,500 years to outgrow the need for political coercion.
Right.
But what about modern secular ideologies?
Oh, wow.
Think about the political isms that exploded in the 20th century. Communism, fascism, extreme militant nationalism.
Systems of belief that function very much like religions.
Exactly. They demand total devotion, they promise a utopian future, and they have caused immense, unspeakable bloodshed over the last 100 years.
That's entirely true.
If ancient spiritual faiths took 15 centuries to learn that coercion ultimately fails, could it be that these modern, purely secular political faiths are only at the very, very beginning of their own long, agonizing maturation arcs?
That is a fascinating point.
How many centuries will it take for purely political ideologies to learn to stand on the merit of their ideas alone without needing the shadow of the sword to enforce them?
That is a chilling but absolutely necessary question. It suggests that the maturation of human societies is an ongoing cyclical process.
The specific belief system might change from spiritual to secular.
But the painful arc of learning to outgrow coercion remains the same.
Something to think about the next time you look at the arc of history.
Definitely.
We want to warmly thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Levine Moten's uncompressed thinking.
It has been an absolute privilege to unpack these massive civilizational timelines with you today.
Keep questioning the surface, keep zooming out, and above all, stay curious.